Probably my first experience with a team was Maris Brothers College, probably year 4 or 5, and we used to play on Sunday afternoon. So Mum would cook a roast on Sunday, and then we'd go out and play about 2:30 on Sunday afternoon. We'd play against Sacred Heart and all of those clubs. And my mum, God bless her, knitted me my Guernsey, my Maris Brothers Guernsey, which was a magenta and blue V, however that goes, the other way, and I thought, gosh, I'm going to stand out here. I did stand out, maybe not for all the right reasons. So, yep, that, and then playing school footy and went to Port Adelaide when I was 15. So I started my journey at Port Adelaide when I was 15 in the junior Colts and went from there. Yeah, I wanted to play footy the best I could be. And I think when I reflect back on my school at the time, I was pretty good at school. So I went to Lefevre Boys Tech and Woodville High School and did quite well, but never really knew what I wanted to do. Ended up being a school teacher, and that was great. And I had a terrific time at university and great career in school as a teacher, and eventually Prince Alfred College as a senior housemaster. Always going to be Port Adelaide because I watched Port Adelaide from the boundary line when I was 5 or 6 years old. Dad would take me as a Mad Port supporter, so we'd be at Albert Oval on the boundary, centre of the ground, where I could watch John Cale play and all my other heroes of that time. And footy was dominant in my thinking about, even when I was looking to go to university, etc. I went and did that and really enjoyed it, but I wanted to play footy. Footy was my goal at the end of the day, and Port Adelaide was my club. Probably when I played for Rosewater Footy Club in the under-15s, and I won a Darwin medal, which is like the Magarey medal of that league. And I had Alan Bettsworth was my coach, and in those young days, so he got the best out of me. And then when I went to Port Adelaide, I had a fair degree of success. Port Adelaide, when I was 15 in the Colts, I grew late, so I was still 5'1" or whatever, and tiny, and so I couldn't get game for the first 2 or 3 games. Then I got a game, and I won the Best and Fairest that year, and I kept winning Best and Fairest through until my league debut when I was 18. It was fantastic, best years of my life. I was 18. I was at university. University life was pretty good. The government paid for all your university fees. Because I was a bonded student, I got paid for being there. So every fortnight I go and collect my $29 from the teachers' college over there, because they knew I was going to be a teacher, and so they paid me. They were short of teachers, South Australia at the time. So what a great time in my life for those years, finishing my degree and playing footy. And playing footy was the be all and end all of everything I did at that time. I liked study, but I did enough to get through. So when I moved to Port Adelaide, Lloyd Zucker is my junior coach, and so he was my coach in the junior Colts for 2 years. Because I was small, I made an impact, but they kept me at junior Colts for 2 years. I played 1 year of thirds, and then the following year I played in the reserves for 6 games, and then got promoted to the A grade when I was 18. That was in 1971. Great coach, old time coach in a lot of ways compared to coaches today, but learnt enormously off Foss Williams. He wrote me when I was 18 and I played my first league game against South Adelaide. Peter Daly fell on me. I remember that. That was my biggest memory from that time. It's a big man, Peter Daly. What a player he was. But Foss wrote a script for me on This Is How You row. So he typed it out himself, and his typewriter, the old typewriters looked like, and you could see it was typed properly. And it was 2 pages of this is what you do. And I could remember, it's been a long time. I could remember that because I would read it every Friday night and every Saturday morning before I'd play. I would read this screed from from Foss, which said this is what you do. So when you run into the back lines, so for example, when you run the back lines, always run a shoulder in front of your opponent, just to make sure that they don't get the advantage and that they know that you're with them. And a whole lot of tips about how you rove as a rover, because Foss was a rover, so he knew that pretty well. So I passed that on to a whole lot of rovers since. I think Timmy Ginniver's still got a copy of it. I don't know where my copy is, but I know Tim's still got a copy of it, and he sent it to me recently, just for reflection. Oh, John Carr was our captain, Keith Spencer, Wayne Broadbridge, Bruce Nyland, Eric Freeman, a whole lot of great names in Port Adelaide. And there's, probably go through the whole list. And 1971 and 72, when I came in, those first 2 years we played 2 grand finals and got beaten in both of them by North Adelaide. And North Adelaide, Barry Robran and the North Adelaide team were champions of Australia in 1972. They were enormous. So we got to the grand final, couldn't win against them on both occasions, which really stung us, because Port's quite proud of its premiership history, but the North Adelaide side in that era was enormous. I think they beat Carlton in 1972 for the Champions of Australia trophy, and they were terrific, and Barry Robin was the best of them. My Saturday mornings before playing footy, very structured, a bit, I always wanted to do the right thing and the same thing. So as it turned out, Darryl Carl, who was my best mate at the time, who rove with me, played half-back flank for Port, but eventually ended up roving, played state footy, and probably one of the most underrated players at Port Adelaide. But Darryl was a good mate of mine, so I would go over to Darryl's mum's place every Saturday morning, and John would go there as well. John Carl was playing at that time. So the three of us would sit around, read magazines, take a footy, go out on the lawn, kick it, go for a run, do that sort of structured thing. Then I'd go home and always be grumpy on a footy day and grab my gear and go to the ground and play. But it was for 200 plus games. It was a ritual that we did. John eventually retired, so he didn't do it, but Darryl and I kept it going for most of my career. Port Adelaide always had a ritual after the game, particularly at Alberton, that you always had to go up and meet with the supporters. So we would always, if we were at Alberton, for example, we would always, all players would have to be upstairs, whether win or lose or draw, with the supporters, because that was the ultimate test. So, if you lost, the supporters were there and they were angry, but they wanted to see you and you had to see them. When we won, it was fantastic. They were very generous. They had a system going that Big Bob McLean set up, where if you liked a player and you liked Darryl Carl for that day and you thought he was the best player, you could give him $2 or something. So when you got 600 people in a room, sometimes someone like Darryl Carl, who was best player for Port, they'd walk out with quite a bit of money, tax-free in those days, which is pretty good. But yeah, I think the moral of the story is that we were always accountable to the people who supported us, our supporters, and they would flock into the club rooms upstairs at Alberton Oval after every game, and we'd invite the opposition to come up as well. They did sometimes not. So pretty hard for us, because expectations of Port Adelaide always be that, and the history shows that we would be in the grand final on average every second year. That was the stats of it, but we weren't. And I think our last premiership was 1965, so it was a long time. 71 and 72 were massively disappointing. 73 was an average year. Then John Cale took over as coach from Foss in 74, so we ended up, I think, 5th, just out of the top 4. 75 we got better and made a prelim final. 76, how long do you want me to talk about 1976 and how good Sturt were in that grand final, and they won. They beat us. Rick Davies had the game of his life that day, and there were 70, got to be 70 odd thousand people in Footy Park on that day in 76. They crashed the gates down at the back. They couldn't count the number of people who were there. It was enormous. I ran out in the ground and I'm looking for the boundary, because normally you run out in the ground, you see you see the boundary, you see where the people are behind the fence. Couldn't see the fence because they were all sitting around the ground because they had so many in there. It was amazing, and we were thrashed. You laugh about it now. We weren't laughing about it at the time. So, in answer to your question, what was it like? It was a barren period for premierships, but we won in 1977, which sort of helped to placate all of that. And then we had a really good run through for the next probably 7 or 8 years. Like in 1976, during that year, everyone was saying Port Adelaide's going to win a premiership. They're so good. Russell Ebert was, winning Magarey medals, and we had a really, really strong side at that time. But there's always the doubt that we hadn't won a premiership. So, what do we, you don't really prove yourself until you've won one of those things. So that doubt was there until 77. And then I think we felt from 77 onwards we could conquer anything. We could be as good as we could be. So 78 we lost the prelim final, 79 premiership, 80 premiership, 81 premiership, 82 prelim final, and 83 we slipped out of it, and then I retired at the end of that. So we had a really good period there from the mid 70s right through until the early 80s, where we were in grand finals most of the time. We won 4 of them. We lost 1, and we played in a couple of losing prelim finals as well. Tim Evans, who kicked over 1,000 goals for Port Adelaide, 1,047 I think, something like that, in a magnificent career, came over from Geelong as a centre-half back. Bob McLean snatched him away from West Torrens, I think, at the time. He was going to go to West Torrens, and he came to us as a centre-half back. And then for whoever in selection thought this guy might be a good full forward, and what a full forward he was, and one of the greatest full forwards. So Tim Evans, John Cale, Stephen Clifford came from Collingwood and played with us, and brought a new vibe into the club, and he was a great player too, and he got a lot of the ball. So Stephen was a terrific player. Darryl Cale I've mentioned to you. Randall Gerlach, it's a really sad story. In 1977, he won the premiership. He shouldn't have played in the game because his doctors told him that his kidney was stuffed, basically. But he played his last game of footy that day in 1977 in that grand final. So how many players do you want me to go through for Port Adelaide that I can talk about? Because there are so many, and they're all good friends. Tony Giles, halfback flanker, all Australian halfback flanker. You're just a great friend of mine and a magnificent player. Then we had, in that period, we also had the Bruce Abernathys and the Craig Bradleys coming through, and the Mark Williams coming through. So we had a lot of great names in footy that came through in that period of time. I think it's the preparation. It was the stuff that we learnt off Russell. Like, Russell was a country boy, come down, and he was pretty wild in his first few years, but then he matured and he became captain and he took on that responsibility. But the preparation that he would do, particularly post-match or pre-match, but particularly post-match, Russell didn't miss many games. Like, as brilliant as he was and as big and strong and robust as he was, he had injuries, but he would make sure that, like, if he had an injury, I'm not going out Saturday night because we played on Saturdays, and he would treat the injury, or Saturday night he would ice it or whatever. He would do everything possible to play the game. So, true professional in terms of the way he looked after himself and made sure that he could be the best he could. The one, like, people don't recognise when Russell went to North Melbourne in 1979, he was captain of the club. That's when I took over the captainship, because he went to North Melbourne. He had a magnificent year in North Melbourne, and he finished 3rd best and fairest, I think. Probably the most touches of anyone in North Melbourne that year. He had a really, really good year, but he did it from Adelaide. Like he would go over on Thursday night, I think it was, play Saturday, come back Sunday. He would do all of his training at Albany. So when we were out Monday, we'd train Monday, Tuesday, Thursday nights because we weren't, we were only semi-professional then. But Russell would come out on those nights, and you'd watch him, and he'd train by himself because he wouldn't train with us because we were an intact team, etc., and didn't want to do that. But he would come out. They let him use the oval, and the work that he did by himself and the physical state that he was in, you go, wow, this guy he really puts everything in. So how magnificent an athlete he was not just luck. It was the preparation and the time he put into it. But then, as I think I've said before with Russell, all of that was fabulous. And he won his 4 Magarey medals, and he won his 6 best and fairest for Port Adelaide. All fantastic in a playing sense. But then his career post-footy, when he came back to Port Adelaide, and I was chief executive at the time, and so I have to say, proudly recruited him, took him from the SANFL, where he had a role, and brought him to our community programs at Port Adelaide. And the work he did for 15, 20 years there, is that as good as footy career? Probably. The things he did there, and the promotion of the club, but also the way that he looked after young people and developed them, and got kids involved in footy and supported charities like Navita, etc. All of that stuff out here that people wouldn't see as much of because it's not in the paper every day. That was as outstanding as this piece in here where he won 4 Magarey medals and 6 best and fairest. He was a great coach, and he has always been a great coach, and I think he plays that down nowadays. I was with him at a function, Port Adelaide function last year. We were celebrating the 1977 grand final, and he got up and he said, I had the cattle, I had the players, we had great players, boom, boom, boom. He talked about all of those, so he really downplayed his effort. But one of the things that John Cahill had as a coach, which is like, how do you do that? He was very disciplined in making sure that we were always, super fit, all of that sort of stuff. But he worked on the philosophy of strength building, so Brian, you are the best rover in South Australia. He would tell me that. So go out and do this and do that. So I'm going, yeah, well, I am. And then I go out and play, and I play pretty good as a result. And there are elements of my game that, I could have improved on. He didn't concentrate on those elements. He just concentrated on telling you how good you were. Then pull you back when you don't do things, etc., as good coaches would do. But that whole thing about having a team of players who want to play for you, John Cahill had that down pat, really. And Ken Hinkley's got a bit of that with Port Adelaide right now. The same sort of thing. The players will play for him, and we play for John. Yeah, I played about 6 or 8 state games, I think. We were in that period of state games. We mostly played against Western Australia. I only played one state game against Victoria, and that was at Sydney, where I played. Lee Matthews was roving, and I was roving against him. That was in 1975. But in that period, in the 70s and early 80s, Victoria banned state games. They wouldn't play any state games. So the only state games we could play were Western Australia and the ACT. That was pretty well it. So there were very few state games in that time, and I got injured for a couple of state games. So end up only playing, call it 6 or 8, or I think it's 8 state games. Whereas in a career that went as long as mine, you would have hoped to have played a lot more of those. Nord were our biggest rival because they had won almost the same number of premierships to us in that period up to the 70s. They were a great club. They were eastern side, we were western side. There was a whole lot of socio-economic stuff in all of that that people drew out of that. And they were a great club. They were, and still are, a fantastic club. And if the world had been different, they would have been the second AFL club here in Adelaide. If Port Adelaide got in its first exercise, but that's now gone. But they still remain a fantastic club. So great rivalry with them. Great rivalry with Sturt. They were really good under Jack Odie. Jack Odie was a master coach, smart tactician, and players again played for him. And so many friends from those two clubs in particular that I still see nowadays. It's amazing when you play, you become friends in state games or whatever when you play together, but you basically don't do much socialising with them. And now, I socialise with a few Port Adelaide players. I probably socialise more with Nord and Sturt players. I love teaching. I really enjoyed that. Once I got into teaching, really enjoyed it. But I got to a stage where I was at Prince Alfred College at the time, and my next step was to either be a deputy headmaster at another school somewhere, and take a leap into there and become a headmaster, and then I would be in education once I took that leap to deputy headmaster or headmaster, I was in education for the rest of my life, basically. I was 37, and so I thought I didn't want to do that. As much as I loved the classroom and my job in my consulting company now, we do a lot of workshops, and so I stand up and teach like a teacher. It's something I didn't want to do, so that's when I made a change. When Port Adelaide I was still associated with the club through my playing career, etc. So they had me down there doing some work with the players around centre square stuff in the 1990 when Port Adelaide went and made its bid to go in the AFL. But I wasn't an official capacity at all, and I was still teaching at that time. And then 1992, Port Adelaide lost its bid. The big story, and you know how that all went. Maligned by the rest of the South Australian football community, hated by the other clubs for what we did at the time, but it was necessary to get South Australia into national competition. People would debate that, whether the time was right, all of that. But anyhow, 1990 is a big story. So 1992, Port Adelaide, coming out of the ashes of that, wanted a new chief executive, and one of the board members asked me if I was interested in that, and I thought I would be, even though I didn't have that commercial background, but I had a really good board. So I went through the process of selection. There were a number of people, and I fortunately won the role. So I started off in March 1992 as chief executive Port Adelaide, and to be honest, lacking a whole lot in terms of understanding the business world and commercial aspects. I was very good in education, but I learnt along the journey. I had Bruce Webber, who was still there at the footy club as the president. I had Greg Bolton in particular, who was a great mentor for me, and I had the board members, most of whom had really good commercial experience and a bit of footy experience. I knew footy pretty well, so that was for Port Adelaide, they wanted a chief executive who had the history and the understanding of how a footy club works, and I was smart enough to have learnt a lot off people along that journey, not just on the playing side, but on the admin side as well, because I was pretty close to Port Adelaide along that whole journey of my career. So yeah, they took a punt on me, I guess. It was tough for the footy club in the sense of seeing that, like, we were happy for players to go, the Greg Andersons and all of the other players who went and played for the Crows. It was great to see them, jump into another level, and AFL was definitely another level, and South Australia deserved to be in the AFL, and the Crows were magnificent in the early years, and they won those two premierships in 97, 98, and it proved that South Australia could battle with the best in the land, and that was really, really good. It was a tough time for us. We had to look forward and say, where does Port Adelaide Footy Club go? my role as chief executive was to work with the board and clearly have a crack at a second AFL licence. So we started that in 1992. We built a 4-year plan. The licence was meant to be available in 1996, but it came in 1997 because Fitzroy didn't drop out quickly enough for the AFL. But anyhow, we had 4 years. We took a couple of years to build a business plan, which was part of the exercise. So the second tender for the second licence in South Australia was a tender. Second licence we won. So we did a lot of work. We produced a 600-page report, which won the day, and still got it. It's still very true to it. It's it's not ever been released publicly, but we've managed to meet and beat most of the benchmarks on that in that first few years. So what we developed and what we won with, we proved would work. And then you've got a rivalry. You've got Port Adelaide. Everyone hates our guts. The Adelaide Footy Club, everyone loves. Beautiful, great for South Australian footy. It'd be fair to say that we had John Cale earmarked to be our coach. Like, he had good success at Collingwood when he went over in 70. Would he go over in 84 or 85? 84, I reckon. 83, 84. I reckon he went, and he had good success there at Collingwood, and he was successful with us. So, yep, we invited him to be our senior coach. We didn't go out looking for anyone else. We thought he was the man to do it, and he did a great job. In those first 2 years, did a really, really good job in getting us up and into the AFL. We were a whisker away from being in the top 8 in the first year in the competition in 1997. We finished 9th or 10th, and had a game or two changed, we would have been the top 8 in our first year, which would have been a big accomplishment for a club that a lot of people, I remember Lee Matthews said Port won't win a game in its first year, but we had we've won more than one game. We did okay. Mark Williams had a really big impact, but we appointed Mark as John's assistant coach. It took me quite a while to get him to come. He was with Essendon, and Essendon with Kevin Sheedy, very successful club, and to get him to come back to Adelaide, and the family, like his wife has got all of her family in Melbourne. So eventually we got him, but that created for us a succession plan. Ultimately, for John would take us the first couple of years merging into Mark. They talk about succession plans in coaches. We definitely had one. Oh, it's great. We had prior to that we built so 97, 98 were good years. 99 was our first year. We won enough games to get us into the finals as a AFL finalist. We lost to North Melbourne, who were eventual premiers, on the MCG that year, but we would count 99 as a successful year. So 3 years into the competition, as Port Adelaide, you've got into the finals, you've made your mark, you lost to the eventual premier, you're going to go somewhere. Then we had a really poor year in 2000. We finished 14th, which for a whole lot of reasons. We built a new facility at Port Adelaide, which was a $6 million facility with sponsors like Alan Scott, etc. And we were in the rate, we were as good as any other AFL club in terms of facilities, but I think we lost our direction in footy a bit for a year. We had a few injuries, and that wasn't a good year. In 2001, 2002, 2003, we won more games than any other AFL club. We won two. We eventually won 3 McClellan trophies, which is top of the end of the minor round in that 4-year period, and we lost 3 prelim finals in a row, and that's when we were called chokers and all of that. But we were very good, and there are a lot of really good sides around. Brisbane was the best of them, and Brisbane won 3 premierships. We won ours in 2004, and that was the vindication of why we got in the AFL. Was we didn't want to be in the AFL just because it's great to be in the AFL. We want to win a premiership to show that Port Adelaide could could do that. Adelaide Crows had done it for 2 years in 97, 98. So, South Australia is good enough to win AFL premierships. So we won ours in 2004. It was magnificent. It was just the best year and the best game at the end of the day. And Mark Williams and our senior coach, we had a great senior coaching panel. We had Phil Walsh, who coached, sadly, we know what happened with Phil, but Coach Adelaide was a terrific coach. We had Alistair Clarkson as one of our coaches. We had Dean Bailey as one of our coaches. So we had really top quality footy people. 2002, which was 2 years before we won the premiership, Greg Bolton and I talked about that because we had taken that journey right through. He was the chair pretty well all the way through because Bruce Webber didn't get voted back on. So Greg took the lead and he took it beautifully, a magnificent leader of the board. So we talked in 2002. He said, well, how long are you going to, we just have that conversation. How long are you going to stick around? I said, well, I reckon I'll give it 2 more years if we, and we were successful, like 2001 and 2, we'd lost 2 prelim finals. So I'm saying, I think we've still got a premiership in us. So let's give it 2 more years and see. At the end, I think I'd leave at the end of 2004, and then he made a decision to stay on beyond that because we wanted continuity. We didn't want the president and the chief executive going at the same time. So I had this deadline with Greg, and then the board at the end of 2004 in Shangri-La. We won a premiership in 2004, so how lucky are you? So I announced that midway through 2004 that I was retiring from the role, and it worked perfectly. It's great. Life after footy is still good. It's great. Getting older as we go. So I took on a couple of roles in government. I was lucky at the time. The government saw something in me as a leader because of what I'd done at Port Adelaide, and by that time, after 13 years at Port Adelaide, I'd got a fair bit of commercial nous with good, experience and good people around me. So the government, the Premier at the time, asked me would I run the Department of Further Education, Employment, Science, Technology, which is back in the education space, include the TAFE system. So I did that as a chief executive for 3 or 4 years, and then I ran trade and economic development for the government for a couple of years as well. So I had a nice time in government. I didn't really enjoy government as much as footy, but as a chief executive, and then since then I've started my own consulting company, which is still going now quite successfully, and I've got to retire from it one day. Less local footy engagement over the year. When I was chief executive at Port Adelaide, I would have to work with the SANFL and the SANFL clubs, but the job was all consuming. And one of the things that that was part of the tender process that most people are probably aware of, but don't know the backstory to, is that when the tender was put out, clearly whichever club or clubs, there were 3 tenderers for it, won the tender, you would have to leave the SANFL competition. We won the tender, and then the SANFL changed the rules and the clubs thought about it. Port Adelaide wouldn't be playing in the SANFL any longer. So that means that you wouldn't get Northern Port and Sturton Port and Glenelg Port and all of those games happening. That wasn't great for the SANFL and its clubs. They wanted to play Port Adelaide because they got really good crowds. So that's when they changed the rules. Yes, Port Adelaide, you can have the AFL licence, but you've got to keep an SANFL club in the SANFL competition, Port Adelaide Magpies. We said, how do you do that? You're splitting, what you're doing is making 2 clubs, and from a marketing point of view, it's really difficult. But they were the rules, and they were the sub-licence holders, so we had to agree to that. So the Port Adelaide Magpies went down to Ethelton, very sad, and they did okay, which was fine, but we weren't allowed to have anything to do with them. Like, they can go down and play at Ethelton, they play in the SANFL, but you can't, Port Adelaide AFL club, you can't have anything to do with them, and that was the rules of the a day. Ultimately, that's all been reversed, and we're back to one club now, which is good. And I occasionally go to the SANFL. I watch Port and Central's play at Central District. They invited me out last year and really loved it. It was great. But I don't have a lot I don't, because I've had been footy since I was 15 at Port Adelaide. I don't need to be there all the time now, so I've got to do some other things in my life other than go to footy games. I could spend all weekend at footy games, and I don't. See the game as a massively different game than when I played, for example. But I find it really enjoyable. I think football's turned from football to entertainment, right? So the game today, particularly at AFL level, is all about entertaining people, and that's good because it builds bigger crowds, and the media has been massive, and then you've got social media and all of that stuff that flows off it. So it's very, very different than when we played. So ours was much more pure footy. It was within clubs, and it was tribal and all that stuff. And now footy, particularly at an AFL level, is very much different, in very much faster. They're much fitter, different game styles and game plans. I still think that when you look back at the 1970s or 80s game between great sides playing grand finals in the SANFL, it's really compelling viewing. It's really I had to watch the 1977 grand final the other week because Port Adelaide was celebrating it, and I've never watched it since I played the game, and it was really interesting to watch and fast. Like, I thought it was pretty fast. Maybe not as fast as the AFL now, I'm pretty sure, but it's definitely become fodder for entertainment now, and I think gambling and everything else has just pushed it way up beyond where we ever were going to be. I think you just got to just make sure that they're aware that there's a lot of people that come into the footy system who don't stay long in it. So, we were fortunate in our period, we could have a career alongside footy. So we always had this to fall back on. So for me, it was teaching and then other things, admin, footy admin, etc. Today, it's all in one pie, and like the average number of games that you get to play in AFL footy of an average player might be, 2 or 3 seasons at best, and you wouldn't play every game. But then you get a lot of people who last a lot longer than that. They play 10 or 13 or 15, the Travis Boaks of the world, and they're fantastic. But not many people get to there, and then not many people end up in media, which is what everyone quite likes. Media is really interesting, but not many players end up there. So careers for players are probably something that's high on the agenda for AFL clubs, I'm sure, and how they start a career when they've had 10 years of AFL footy, and you can't just go out and be an accountant or whatever at that point in time. So there's a bit of that, plus the mental. I think I do worry about the mental stress that's on players, and you can see what's happening in the AFL with various players at the moment, how they respond to the pressure of the environment that they're in, and some of them don't respond too well. And we've seen recently some players have taken more drastic action, and that worries me because that age when you're in your 30s and 40s, you're very fragile, and particularly men don't tell people what they're thinking and do some silly things. So I worry about that.